There are many mysterious forces in nature, not only the origin of all life but also the source that nurtures the environment where humans live. But driven by authority and wealth, the natural ecosystem is constantly being destroyed, awakening dormant dark forces and creating terrifying superheroes. The story begins in a pitch-black swamp forest, where 3 crew members are assigned to drop a special box into the water, but none of them realize that this action will bring deadly consequences. As strange phenomena suddenly occur, as they prepare to leave the scene, the engine fails to start, and the boat is violently shaken by a tremendous force. In the next moment, vines emerge from the water and quickly drag one of the crew members into the depths, leaving the others in a panic, unable to see anything in the darkness. Suddenly, the struggling crew member resurfaces, his face covered in blood, desperately calling for help. Just as he is about to make it back to the boat, the vines strike again, ultimately drowning him. Then, the surrounding trees begin to stir, ready to launch the next wave of attacks. Seeing the vines quickly retreat into the water, the crew members hurriedly throw a bomb in defense. As the explosion occurs, the forest lets out a wailing sound, further enraging the dark force. The vines immediately launch a deadly attack, piercing the boat's hull, impaling a man through the heart, and lifting him into the air in a display of power. The last remaining old crew member quickly abandons the boat, attempting to reach the shore and escape this terrifying place, but is ultimately surrounded by the dreadful vines. The next morning, in a classroom, a girl named Susie seems to be seriously ill. Not only does she cough up black liquid, but her nose also inexplicably starts to bleed. She collapses in pain and is immediately rushed to the hospital by the teacher. Meanwhile, Abby, a professional doctor from the CDC, is treating an epidemic in Africa. Even when faced with a young boy waving a knife, she remains calm and composed, removing her protective gear with a smile. Her gentle demeanor quickly puts the boy at ease, and she takes his sister for treatment, preventing the epidemic from spreading further. When Abby sees the information in a file, she is shocked to discover that the incident occurred in her long-forgotten hometown. Following headquarters instructions, Abby and her colleague quickly head to her hometown, passing by familiar scenery that brings back painful memories. Upon arriving at the town's only hospital, the doctor explains the current situation in detail, seeing the urgency as more and more people become infected. Abby, as the commander, orders all medical staff to take the strictest precautions. The CDC team will analyze the illness as quickly as possible to find a treatment and help the town survive this disaster. Abby then enters the isolation room to observe patient 0, Susie, and discovers a twig covered in a sticky substance on the bed. Suspecting it may be related to the illness, she hands it to the doctor for testing. During their conversation, Abby learns that Susie's lungs are also infected. After the doctor leaves, Abby sees a stranger examining the reports, prompting her to approach and question him. The man calmly responds, explaining that he can help and asks to see Susie's admission records. Before he can finish his sentence, he is treated as a suspect and thrown out of the hospital. Later, a colleague reports that Susie's mother passed away early, and her father, the old crew member, mysteriously disappeared in the swamp last night. Abby begins her investigation, visiting Susie's home alone. At that moment, a police car arrives on the scene, and Abby recognizes the officer as a childhood friend. Their reunion is filled with joy and memories of the affection they once had for each other. The officer explains that the old crew member was a good father but often engaged in illegal activities in the swamp. They both sense something is wrong, noticing the front door is unlocked. Inside, the house is filled with numerous vines, and suddenly they hear a strange noise upstairs, but no one responds to their calls. As they investigate upstairs, the vines on the walls begin to spread rapidly, and the hallway on the second floor is filled with an eerie atmosphere. The walls are covered in vines and plants, oozing with a sickly green fluid. The officer draws his gun and kicks open the door, searching for the source of the sound, only to see a mysterious figure crouched on the floor, seemingly cutting something. When the officer taps him on the shoulder, the figure panics and falls to the ground. Abby recognizes the man as the stranger who was thrown out of the hospital earlier. He confesses that he was collecting samples to find a cure and asks them to check the bathroom. What they see there is horrifying. The old crew member is dead, his body stiff and covered in strange vines. Everyone is baffled by the scene, something they've never encountered before. Abby also finds some medication by the sink, suspecting that the old crew member died in agony. The police seal off the scene, trying to determine the cause of death, and they learn that the stranger's name is Alec. A few months ago, Avery hired Alec to analyze the commercial value of the swamp, but he discovered some extraordinary plants evolving there. Alec believes this is connected to the patient's infections and invites Abby to visit his lab. Using humor, he tries to change the poor first impression he made, seeing that no cure has yet been found. Abby agrees to go with him. They take a boat into the swamp and arrive at a house built on the water. This is Alec's lab, equipped with all the necessary research tools and various plant samples. In the known world, mutagens are a special element capable of easily damaging human genes, but during his research, Alec detected strong biological activity in the swamp and found a new mutagen while collecting samples from the deepest part. To demonstrate its incredible effects, Alec places an ordinary vine into a container and then adds a drop of the mutagen from the swamp. The vine grows at an astonishing rate, filling the entire box within seconds, but suddenly, the vine seems to want to break through the glass, and Alec quickly releases a chemical gas to destroy the dangerous vine completely. Finally, Abby realizes that by comparing the patient's blood reports, they can identify the connection to the mutagen, making it easier to develop a treatment. Sometime later, the mayor holds an emergency meeting, and the residents angrily blame the mysterious epidemic on the swamp, believing it to be nature's revenge against humanity. Since much of the town is surrounded by the swamp, its natural ecosystem is vital to their survival. However, due to the company's excessive development, the swamp has been severely damaged. Avery steps in to calm everyone, stating that his research in the swamp may lead to the development of new fertilizers. He promises significant commercial benefits and more job opportunities, or else the town will never thrive. After a great speech, the emotions of all the residents were successfully calmed. When the meeting ended, Alec stepped forward to explain his research findings, suspecting that the outbreak was related to the swamp, but Avery didn't care at all, dismissing the illness as a normal occurrence and reminding Alec that he had been fired 2 weeks ago, before brushing him off and walking away. Meanwhile, Abby was collecting samples from the old crewman's corpse when Alec arrived to help and learned that Susie's condition was worsening. They removed a vine from the corpse and dripped the mutagen onto it to observe. Amazingly, the dead plant cells came back to life. However, they didn't notice that the vine inside the corpse was also stimulated. Not only did it begin to grow rapidly, but it also started controlling the crewman's body. At the same time, Susie experienced a chain reaction, and the corpse suddenly sat up, scaring the two of them into a corner. Then the vine released massive roots, and the corpse began to approach them. As they tried to escape, the vine spread quickly across the ground, instantly pulling Abby down. Luckily, Alec rushed in and managed to stop it, narrowly avoiding disaster. At that moment, Susie arrived at the scene. After witnessing her father's monstrous transformation, she was so frightened that she fainted. Desperate to save her, Abby risked her life to rush out, grabbing Susie and dodging the vine's attacks as they fled. Alec stayed behind to deal with the creature, throwing the punctured alcohol bottle at the vine. Finally, he ignited the fire and destroyed the creature, stopping the vine's rampant growth. Susie suddenly showed no signs of life, but thanks to Abby's efforts, her heartbeat was restored. After surviving the ordeal, Abby and Alec began to develop a special bond. Abby decided to investigate the old crewman's fate, and they took a boat to a restaurant, the busiest place in town at night. They found a friend there, who was not only the daughter of the restaurant owner but also a well-known amateur journalist in town. After some inquiries, they learned that someone had hired a few crew members to venture into the swamp every night, seemingly engaging in illegal activities, but those who went mysteriously disappeared, and no one knew who was behind it. At that moment, Avery's wife suddenly arrived and requested a private conversation with Abby, asking the others to leave temporarily. It turned out that Maria's deceased daughter had died while playing with Abby. Although years had passed and the police had ruled it an accident, Maria still harbored deep resentment and blamed Abby for her loss. She warned Abby to leave town immediately after the epidemic was over. Faced with the painful memory of her friend's death, Abby felt immense sadness. Knowing she needed to follow the clues, she held back her tears and headed to the next location. It was pouring rain as they took a boat into the depths of the swamp. In the distance, they spotted a strange shadow, a heavily damaged boat impaled by massive vines. On board, they found a computer and a chemical box containing a strange yellow substance, seemingly a device for releasing something underwater. Back at the lab, Alec placed the substance in an analyzer, and while waiting for the results, they talked about their past experiences. Abby admitted she had seen information online about Alec's negative reputation, making him feel awkward and regretful about his past actions. Alec had once been a famous figure in a big city, hailed as one of the most promising biologists, but in his pursuit of fame, he had falsified research data, ultimately leading to his downfall. One day, he realized that what he truly wanted wasn't fame, but the joy of research, so he accepted Avery's commission in the hope of helping more people through his work. At this point, Abby opened up about why she had stayed away from her hometown. The Avery couple once had a daughter, and she and Abby had been close friends since childhood. But before they graduated high school, an accident occurred, and Abby was responsible for her friend's death. Just then, the analyzer beeped, interrupting Abby before she could finish. Seeing Abby's tears, Alec didn't press the matter further. They examined the results and found that the yellow substance in the chemical box was very similar to the mutagen collected from the swamp. They suspected someone had deliberately dumped it, causing the epidemic. Abby wanted to take the substance back to the hospital, hoping it might help them find a cure. Meanwhile, Alec discovered the locations of other boxes on the computer. To prevent more people from getting infected, they decided to retrieve all the boxes from the swamp, and then split up to search for them. Following the coordinates, Alec found another box in the swamp, but then a boat appeared in the distance, shining a bright light toward him. Before he could see who it was, Alec was shot and fell onto the boat. To ensure he was completely destroyed, the attackers threw a bomb onto the boat. With his last bit of strength, Alec rolled into the water, avoiding the powerful explosion. Hearing the loud noise, Abby saw the firelight in the distance. Alec painfully crawled onto the shore, but his injuries were too severe, and he soon collapsed. Unable to move, this allowed the surrounding plants to quickly engulf him, dragging his dying body into the water. Vines started piercing Alec's body, seemingly initiating some kind of fusion. When Abby arrived, all she found were the remnants of the boat, and the perpetrators had already fled, leaving no evidence behind. As the mutagen spread in the water, the vines suddenly grew wildly and launched a fierce attack on the boat, throwing Abby into the water. As the vines prepared to strike again, Abby frantically swam toward the shore. When she pushed aside the branches in front of her, she was horrified to find the body of one of the crew members. Just as Abby thought she had no escape, the vines seemed to be repelled by some force and gradually retreated into the water. At that moment, Alec surfaced, but he had already transformed into a towering plant creature, and Abby was terrified. As the creature continued to approach, Abby finally found a place to escape. In the end, Alec watched the figure of his love as he gradually lost consciousness and fell into a coma. Later, Abby returned to the scene with the police to conduct an investigation. The group searched the forest and dredged the water for wreckage, but they never found Alec's body. Lucilia then received the news and arrived. She is Matt's mother. After a brief discussion, they concluded that this was just an accidental incident. This result left Abby very dissatisfied, and she pointed out that Alec had been investigating illegal activities. She suspected that things were not so simple and warned that there was a monster in the swamp, but Lucilia dismissed it, mocking the absurd claim. Meanwhile, Alec was feeling panicked and lost in the swamp. At the same time, Susie at the hospital seemed to have formed some kind of connection, and Alec, seeing his reflection in the water, noticed his terrifying appearance, his entire body covered in bizarre plants, and tried to tear the plants from his skin. But when he pulled at his head, he discovered the shocking truth. His body had completely transformed into plant matter, and Susie felt the same emotions, beginning to thrash violently in her hospital bed. Alec let out a helpless and furious roar before sinking into a deep sleep in the swamp. Meanwhile, Abby had a nightmare where her deceased best friend suddenly appeared, looking horrifying and seemingly trying to take her life. Awakening with a terrified scream, she realized it was just a nightmare. Just then, a colleague called, informing her that there were more infected people in town. Though Susie had stabilized, they still hadn't found a cure. Currently, Abby was staying at Liz's house, and she encountered Liz's girlfriend in the kitchen. Liz then joined them in the kitchen, and the two shared a warm kiss. After sending her girlfriend off, Liz and Abby talked about Alec's accident. As a journalist, Liz suspected that something was amiss, but the police had sealed off the lab, preventing further investigation of the clues. Determined to find the truth and a cure for the epidemic, Abby decided to seek Avery's help, hoping he could assist her. Liz was worried and didn't want her friend to get hurt again, but Abby was resolute and left despite the warning. Heading to the town's largest mansion, the familiar butler greeted her at the door and kindly welcomed her in to wait. Seeing the photos of her best friend on the cabinet, Abby was flooded with happy childhood memories. Avery then came out and treated Abby like his own daughter, warmly embracing her. happy to be reunited. He also apologized for the pain young Abby had faced back then and for having to endure his wife's anger. Avery expressed deep guilt and said he didn't want to lose his daughter again, which made Abby feel relieved. She then explained her reason for coming because Alec's research in the swamp might hold the key to curing the epidemic. Abby hoped that Avery, who was establishing a research institute, could help her gain access for the investigation. She warned that if the epidemic continued to spread, the entire town would soon spiral out of control, but Avery politely declined, citing commercial secrets. Meanwhile, Maria secretly went to a restaurant where a mysterious witch resided. This witch could not only predict anyone's fate but also communicate with the dead. After much pleading, Maria convinced the witch to perform a seance, but when the witch tried to summon Maria's daughter's spirit, she sensed a terrifying dark ghost, and the witch collapsed to the floor, shaking, letting out horrific screams that sent Maria flying out the door. The witch regained consciousness and explained that a dark force had awakened in the swamp and that she had accidentally encountered an evil entity during the seance. The witch warned Maria to let go of her obsession and allow her daughter to rest in peace. Otherwise, this obsession could be exploited by the dark force. Meanwhile, Abby's colleague heard a noise and went to check the ward, only to discover that Susie had broken out through the window and escaped. Abby, on the other hand, went to a shop that Alec had frequented before his death. The shop owner was once a famous actor who played leading roles in movies, but with the release of more new films, he had faded into obscurity. Upon learning that they were looking for clues, he informed them they were too late. The police had been there a few hours earlier and had taken all of Alec's belongings. Fortunately, the shop's computer still had some swamp logs. Abby took the computer upstairs to search for clues and watched Alec's video logs, where he even expressed his feelings for her on camera. This brought a wave of sadness over Abby. Then she received a text from her colleague informing her that Susie had left the hospital. Meanwhile, a scientist couple received a summons and traveled a long way to the mansion. Both were renowned geneticists with significant contributions to the scientific community. To continue receiving substantial funding, the wife repeatedly told her husband to speak politely during their meeting and not to complain. When they arrived in the backyard to meet Avery, Jason noticed a nearby withered tree and instructed the gardener to water it with sugar water to save it. They then began discussing business, but Avery angrily reprimanded them. It turned out that the mutagen in the swamp was developed by the scientist. The initial plan was for the plants to grow rapidly, draining the swamp to expose more land for valuable economic development. But now, with the rise in patience and scrutiny from the CDC, Avery believed this was the mutagen's doing and ordered the scientists to stay and fix the problem, or he would cut off their funding. Meanwhile, Abby informed the officer at the hospital about the situation. Although it was unclear how Susie managed to escape, they needed to bring her back for isolation as soon as possible to prevent further infections. Matt then received a call that there was a clue left by Susie at the pier. They rushed to the scene and found Susie's bracelet. Suspecting that she had entered the swamp, the boat that had already set sail was piloted by the supervising officer, who was headed for the dangerous depths of the swamp, the same place where Susie's father had met his demise. This made Abby extremely worried, and she quickly set out to search for her. The supervisor didn't know that Susie was already hiding on the boat when he received a message from the police asking everyone to help search for the missing Susie, but the supervisor didn't care and was focused on patrolling the swamp. At that moment, he spotted a suspicious boat that seemed to be engaged in illegal activities. He immediately approached, turned on the warning lights, and ordered the two crew members to stop. Then he moved closer to inspect the boat and demanded they open the box on the deck. However, in the next second, his face was suddenly pierced by a weapon, rendering him unable to make a sound in his agony. The ruthless crew members, determined to prevent anyone from discovering their illegal dumping, decided to steer the patrol boat far away and dispose of the body. They told their accomplice to quickly retrieve all the boxes and leave no evidence in the swamp. As Susie's fear intensified, the plant creature also sensed the danger. Meanwhile, Abby was on a police boat heading to the depths of the swamp. As they spent time alone, Matt took the opportunity to confess his feelings. He mentioned that he had admired Abby's athleticism since elementary school gym class, but Abby was completely unaware and simply remarked that they were just good friends. This left Matt a bit speechless, but he decided to continue pursuing her. At the same time, the plant creature in the wild sensed the scent of blood. Meanwhile, the crew members were preparing to sink the body into the water, and Susie, who had witnessed everything, seized the moment when no one was paying attention and jumped off the boat to escape. But the splash caught the crew's attention, and they quickly realized something was wrong. Seeing Susie flee into the forest, the crew members grabbed a knife and began the chase. The plant creature, which could control natural forces, also sensed the direction in which the two were running, but still not fully adapted to its massive body. It could only stagger forward slowly. Susie found an abandoned house on the water and quickly crawled under the floorboards to hide. At the same time, Abby discovered the abandoned patrol boat in the swamp and also found the injured and fallen supervisor. As she approached to check on him, she realized he was still faintly alive. Matt noticed a light in the distance and went ahead to investigate alone. Meanwhile, the crew members found the abandoned house on the water, and Susie, terrified, tried to avoid the light and stay out of sight, but suddenly, a knife pierced through the floorboards, causing Susie to scream in fear. At the same time, Abby heard the noise coming from the forest and immediately called Matt, telling him to return because Susie might be in danger. One of the crew members broke the window, preparing to crawl under the floorboards, while Susie quickly climbed a nearby ladder to the attic, trying to escape, but with nowhere else to run. The crew member quickly followed her up. In that critical moment, a loud noise came from the water, causing the crew member to feel uneasy, but when he didn't see anyone nearby, he was suddenly attacked by the plant creature from behind, and his neck was gripped by a tremendous force. Unable to break free, the crew member desperately used a small knife to fight back. The plant creature, feeling the pain, released its grip, but thanks to its connection with nature, the wound healed instantly, and it let out a beast-like roar. The surrounding vines launched a deadly attack, controlled by the plant creature's dark consciousness, lifting the crew member into the air and finally tearing him apart limb from limb. Despite the horror before her, little Susie wasn't afraid at all. Instead, they began to communicate through their thoughts. When Abby arrived at the abandoned house on the water and found Susie, she was about to greet her when the plant creature suddenly stood up. Abby was frozen in fear, but as she slowly regained her composure, she quickly grabbed Susie and led her away. The plant creature didn't follow, as it was now too terrifying in appearance, and it could only watch as the woman it loved walked away. At that moment, Matt arrived just in time to get the two of them onto the police boat. When Abby looked back again, the plant creature was already gone. Meanwhile, Avery returned home to rest but didn't see his wife. He then realized that she still couldn't let go and was sleeping in their daughter's room again, but he didn't notice that his daughter's soul had already been consumed by darkness, and through his wife's obsession, it had become an evil spirit lying in the bed. At this point, Abby asked Susie about the origin of the creature, and Susie revealed a shocking truth. The plant creature they had just seen was actually Alec, who had perished in the swamp. Abby was stunned by what she heard. Meanwhile, the crew member's spirit, turned into an evil ghost, invaded Alec's dreams, constantly blaming him for his cruel actions. The ghost rushed forward to attack, vowing to return for revenge. Alec struggled and finally awoke from the nightmare, only to find himself staring at the crew member's lifeless body. He was filled with regret for his actions and let out a pained roar towards the sky. The next morning, Abby was deeply confused by the truth and confided in her friend. She explained that Susie had gone to the swamp to help a strange man, a man whose body was covered in plants and vines, and whose name was the same as Alec's. But driven by fear, she hadn't verified his identity and had fled the scene in terror, a decision she now regretted. Just then, she received a text from the doctor and rushed to the hospital to check the situation, only to find out that the CDC had changed its strategy. Lacking experience in fighting the epidemic, they refused to consider Abby's ideas and instead made the wrong decision to inject large doses of antibiotics into the patients. Additionally, Avery funded the effort to have Jason study the old crewman's body in an attempt to create a cure. Abby then went to the morgue, where she recognized the famous Jason. He quickly noticed something unusual about the body. It had parasites inside, and the host had undergone significant mutations, but it was all caused by the plants, an unprecedented medical condition. During their conversation, Jason also mocked Abby's lack of expertise. Meanwhile, Liz intercepted insider information from the journalist circle and threatened the banker to agree to an interview and reveal the Swamp Project's secrets, or she would expose his and Avery's crimes. It turned out that the banker had been secretly taking bribes, abusing his power to engage in illegal activities, forging documents for Avery, and securing massive loans from the bank. The banker was so terrified by the threat that he was rendered speechless. Meanwhile, Abby was preparing to return to the office to rest when she noticed a colleague taking care of a patient who had signs of infection on their face. Then, writhing in pain, they collapsed to the ground, vomiting a large amount of green liquid. Abby quickly called for medical help and instructed them to use a special treatment protocol. Seeing her colleague also infected, she felt utterly helpless. Afterward, she met with Liz and explained what had happened at the hospital. To prevent the epidemic from spreading further, Abby decided to sneak into the lab, hoping to find a way to cure the outbreak in Alec's research reports. She also asked Liz's girlfriend to go to the depths of the swamp to retrieve the wreckage. Meanwhile, an old man was hunting in the forest, hearing eerie sounds but seeing no prey. When he moved closer, he discovered countless insects devouring a wild boar, but he didn't notice the danger behind him. He was attacked by the dead crew member and ultimately met a gruesome end in the swamp's forest. On the other hand, Jason discovered that the conditions in the swamp were extremely unusual. Not only was the plant life developing at an accelerated rate, but it far exceeded their initial expectations. Seeing the passion in Jason's eyes, his wife felt very pleased, but during their conversation, she suddenly felt a wave of confusion, forgetting what she was doing. It turned out that his wife was suffering from memory loss, and her condition was worsening. Her husband kept offering comforting words, promising that he would soon develop a drug to repair her genes. Meanwhile, Avery and his wife were having dinner at home when Nathan suddenly showed up uninvited, revealing that the bank had begun investigating their transactions. Although he had already taken Avery's bribe, he feared that the journalist would expose their dealings, leaving him no escape from prison, so he decided to back out of his partnership with Avery. He also warned Avery to return the funds immediately, or he would go public and ruin Avery's reputation. The swamp project would be forcibly shut down, and Maria overheard the entire conversation between the two men. Meanwhile, Abby sneaked into the lab under the cover of night, but much of the equipment had already been taken, and the mutagen was missing. She found an experiment logbook and began searching for related clues, but Abby didn't notice the countless insects crawling through the cracks, gathering into a formidable evil force. Elsewhere, Lucilia came to investigate the crime scene, and Avery lied, claiming he had no idea who had harmed Alec. During their conversation, Avery made lewd comments and suggested they do something in the living room. It turned out the two had been in love for decades and had been having an affair for years. Avery married his current wife for her wealth. As they were about to get intimate, they suddenly heard a noise from upstairs, prompting Lucilia to realize something was wrong and quickly leave the mansion. Meanwhile, Maria was in the bathroom, looking at her daughter's bracelet when a dark spirit suddenly appeared in the mirror, resembling her deceased daughter. The spirit spoke of the father's infidelity and insisted that the mother should take deadly revenge. Otherwise, the family fortune would be lost. This left Maria deeply conflicted, her thoughts gradually influenced by the spirit. Elsewhere, Abby picked up a bottle of alcohol on the table and was reminded of her memories with Alec, feeling a wave of sadness. At that moment, strange noises suddenly came from the surrounding area, and she realized that a large number of insects had entered the house, while eerie footsteps sounded on the roof, as if someone was pacing outside. The next second, the dead crew member jumped into the house, searching for his revenge target. Seeing this, Abby immediately lit a flare, which affected the crew member due to the high temperature. Just then, the plant creature burst through the floor, appearing as the very target the crew member was seeking. The plant creature warned the crew member not to harm his loved one. As the plant creature adapted to its body, it developed an extremely strong resistance to attacks. Abby tried to ambush the crew member with an axe, only to realize it had no effect on him. The plant creature continued its violent assault, quickly overpowering the crew member, who was so terrified that he no longer dared to fight. As the plant creature was about to unleash its full power, it recognized the monster before it as the crew member it had killed. Feeling remorseful, the plant creature sympathized with the crew member, who had been corrupted by darkness. It then used its natural powers to purify the dark consciousness within the crew member. As the insects dispersed, the crew member turned into a pile of sludge. Finally, the plant creature approached Abby and gently removed the glass shards from her hair, bringing back memories and confirming that the being before her was indeed Alec. Abby then asked about what had happened to him and the cause of his mutation, but Alec could only recall a great fire. When he woke up, he had already become a monster. Still confused about his identity, Abby offered words of encouragement, assuring him that they would find a way to turn him back. During their conversation, Alec revealed the key to fighting the epidemic. It turned out the virus wasn't an aggressive invader but was retaliating against humanity. They had tried the strongest antibiotics, but the virus continued to spread. Abby then suggested injecting a suppressant to temporarily block the body's immune system, allowing the virus to coexist peacefully within. Unaware of the situation, the supervisor argued that this violated standard treatment protocols, angrily instructing security to remove Abby from the hospital. But after her colleague was injected with the suppressant, they stabilized, leaving everyone in shock. Seeing this, the supervisor ordered all patients to be injected with the suppressant, and the epidemic began to gradually improve. Meanwhile, Maria prepared to rest in her daughter's room, where Avery was already waiting. He apologized for his past mistakes, expressing his hope that they could return to how things used to be. After sweet-talking her, he asked Maria to provide more funds so Jason could quickly complete his research, promising that they could live a happy life together once it was done. But Maria finally realized that her husband was only after her wealth. She believed all of this was in vain and firmly refused his request. Elsewhere, Abby went to a restaurant to relax, where she ran into Matt, who praised her for her heroic actions at the hospital that day. Under the influence of alcohol, Abby accepted Matt's invitation, and the two quickly became lost in a romantic atmosphere. Meanwhile, the plant creature watched the scene from the forest, feeling immense sadness as he saw his beloved dancing with another man. Additionally, Daniel was about to turn off the TV in the hall when he noticed the witch sitting on the couch. It turns out that Daniel was unable to leave the town due to fate's design. Through the witch's magic, he learned that he had an unfinished mission, but years passed while he waited. Daniel grew tired of his dull life, but this time the witch predicted that his future would be different. She foresaw that Daniel's mission was connected to Abby, who had come to town. Meanwhile, Liz's girlfriend was retrieving the wreckage of the small boat from the swamp when she discovered numerous bullet holes, indicating that the explosion wasn't an accident. She quickly informed Liz. Back at home, the banker heard strange noises and initially thought a burglar had broken in, so he grabbed a golf club as a weapon, but it was Avery who stepped out, hurling accusations and expressing that he felt deeply humiliated. The banker tried to explain, but Avery punched him to the ground. Even though Avery didn't have a weapon, he fearlessly approached. The banker, not wanting to appear weak, threatened to expose all their secrets, but Avery quickly disarmed him and struck him on the head, knocking him out. To clean up the scene, Avery dragged the banker to the bathtub and brutally murdered him, then wiped the blood from his face. Elsewhere, a lumberjack and his father entered the forest at night to cut down trees they had felled earlier. As the chainsaw shook the trees, a hotel key and several human teeth fell from the branches, causing the lumberjack to feel uneasy. As he was about to stop working, a corpse suddenly fell on him, pinning him to the ground. The corpse bit into the lumberjack's arm, and as he struggled to free himself, something eerie seemed to burrow into his wound. Father and son fled in terror and didn't dare report what had happened. The plant creature sensed the impending danger and used its vines to touch the corpse, detecting a powerful dark energy. The next morning, the lumberjack arrived late to his part-time job at the diner, explaining that he had run into trouble in the forest the previous night. When he entered the kitchen to work, his arm wound became unbearably itchy, but he didn't realize that dark matter had already parasitized his body. He then began experiencing terrifying hallucinations, seeing a snake suddenly slither into the sink. Noticing the lumberjack's startled expression, Liz approached to check but saw nothing unusual, so she told him to hurry up and finish washing the dishes. But under the influence of the dark matter, the lumberjack saw another terrifying hallucination, with the snake tightly coiled around his arm. Unable to shake it off, terrified, he grabbed a knife to attack it, but only those infected with dark matter could see these horrifying visions. As the sound of bones cracking echoed, blood poured from his arm, and just before losing consciousness, he grabbed the manager with his other hand. The dark matter then transferred to its new host. Elsewhere, Abby took a boat to the swamp alone, despite the epidemic having been safely contained, but she decided to stay in town to continue researching a cure to help Alec return to his original form. Suddenly, vines emerged from the water and gradually wrapped around the boat, pulling it slowly toward the shore, where she saw the plant creature in the forest. Following Abby's suggestion, the plant creature offered a sample of itself, hoping to find a cure as soon as possible. He also warned her that a dark force had awakened and to be cautious when returning. Abby took the sample back to the hospital for research, where Jason noticed the data on the computer. At first, he displayed a haughty attitude, pointing out errors in the figures, but after observing through the microscope, he was utterly shocked. He discovered animal cells within the plant tissue, and as an authority in the biological field, Jason proposed taking over the analysis of the sample. He assured her that not only could he find the answer more quickly, but he could also fulfill Avery's request. Wanting to help Alec return to normal, Abby agreed to his request but insisted on being informed immediately of any research findings. They reached an agreement and began researching the sample together. Later, Abby visited the ward and saw that all the patients were being discharged. Although Susie had fully recovered, She was now alone in town, as her father had passed away and she had no other relatives. Avery arrived to announce that they would be hosting a party to celebrate the town's victory over the epidemic, which delighted everyone. Maria approached to check on Susie and, during their conversation, reminisced about the child she had lost, briefly embracing the role of a mother again, with a smile that hadn't been seen in years. To please his wife and to secure more funds for investment, Avery decided to adopt the orphan Susie. Meanwhile, Lucilia was investigating the lumberjack's death, but no one knew what had happened, turning it into a strange case. Abby received the news and came over, learning from Liz that the lumberjack had gone to the swamp the night before. Seeing the town plagued by strange occurrences, first the sudden epidemic, then Alec's mysterious resurrection, Abby suspected that the swamp's virus was responsible. The manager, now infected by the dark matter, suddenly felt unwell and began experiencing terrifying hallucinations. The surroundings instantly turned pitch black, accompanied by eerie laughter. It turned out that those parasitized by dark matter would see their deepest fears. The manager relived his childhood trauma of burglars breaking into his home and brutally murdering his mother. Abby noticed something was wrong, seeing the manager's strange behavior as if he was witnessing something terrifying, and he picked up a nearby shotgun, pointing it defensively, before starting to shoot wildly at the air, smashing bottles and windows. Lucilia heard the gunfire and warned the manager to drop his weapon, but under the influence of the dark matter, he couldn't see anyone in his hallucination. Fortunately, the manager's gun jammed, and as Lucilia subdued him, her neck was accidentally scratched. Abby quickly retrieved a sedative from her medical kit, and as the drug took effect, the manager gradually returned to normal. But Lucilia didn't realize that she had become the new host for the dark matter. Later, the manager awoke in a hospital bed, relieved to learn that he hadn't harmed anyone, and explained that what he had seen was a replay of his childhood trauma, vividly brought to life before his eyes. After being questioned by Abby, she learned where the lumberjack had been the previous night. Abby then went to the swamp alone, trying to find the cause of the outbreak. She arrived at the spot where the lumberjack had been and saw the chainsaw left on the ground, along with a motel key. At that moment, eerie sounds echoed, and Abby cautiously approached to investigate. She found a corpse but couldn't determine the cause of death. The plant creature, possessing the power of nature, could sense the movements throughout the swamp. It also detected Abby's presence and explained that the corpse had once harbored a terrifying dark matter, but now it had been released and not only kills its hosts by exploiting their fears but also continually seeks out new targets. This made Abby realize the truth and suspect that Lucilia might be the next infected. The plant creature warned her that this entity was not of human origin. It must be brought back to the swamp to prevent further tragedies. Meanwhile, Avery invited the entire town to a banquet. As the witch stood in the hallway, she suddenly sensed an ominous premonition, stating that a bloody storm was about to hit the town. She told Daniel to be prepared, no matter what, to protect Abby, or he wouldn't be able to break the pact with the devil and escape the town's curse. It turns out that Daniel had made a deal with the devil to become a star. Although he had tasted fame, he paid a heavy price and was doomed never to leave the town. When Abby returned to town and met with Liz, she learned that the key found in the swamp belonged to a motel that had been abandoned for years. Back then, the guests kept going insane and harming themselves brutally, leaving the police and doctors at a loss. After the last victim disappeared, the horrific events finally came to an end. Abby explained that it wasn't over. Although the victim had gone to the swamp alone and taken their own life to protect others, the lumberjack accidentally trespassed into forbidden territory, bringing the dark matter back to town. The two of them quickly headed to the banquet to prevent the tragedy from repeating. Meanwhile, Lucilia was ensuring safety at the banquet when, under the influence of the dark matter, she began seeing terrifying hallucinations. She saw her son suddenly being attacked and stabbed multiple times in the chest by an assailant. Lucilia rushed forward to help and called for an ambulance. As her son was on the verge of death, she cried out in fear while the assailant stood there, coldly smiling. In a fit of rage, Lucilia drew her gun, and just as Abby arrived on the scene to explain that it was all a hallucination, Lucilia, having lost her senses, prepared to shoot the assailant to avenge her son. Fortunately, Daniel intervened in time to prevent the tragedy. In the process of comforting Lucilia, Abby was accidentally scratched on the arm, allowing the dark matter to parasitize her as well. To prevent anyone else from being harmed, Abby quickly left the banquet and took a boat alone to the swamp. She wandered through the forest, calling out to Alec, hoping to find a way to cure herself. At that moment, the moonlight was obscured by clouds, and the surroundings turned pitch black. The terrifying hallucinations began. revealing that Abby's deepest fear was her violent father. He not only abused her mother daily but also frequently dragged her outside to torture her. Abby struggled desperately but couldn't break free. In reality, the plant creature stood before Abby, holding her protectively while absorbing the dark matter into itself. To resist the dark matter's influence, the plant creature staggered away, heading toward the corpse. It finally transferred the dark matter back into the corpse and used the power of nature to seal the energy deep underground. The next morning, the two of them discussed the recent events. With Abby being a professional doctor and Alec a seasoned physicist, neither could explain what had happened. It defied human logic. Alec, now mutated, not only gained the power of nature but also became attuned to the Earth's dark consciousness. He explained that the swamp had been deliberately damaged, causing life to suffer continuously. It had also awakened a powerful dark force that was preparing to launch a terrifying retaliation against humanity, warning that the danger was far from over. Meanwhile, Maria thanked her husband over the phone for his kindness and expressed her satisfaction with the decision to adopt Susie, saying she was willing to provide more funds for his continued research. At that moment, loud noises came from upstairs, and even the chandelier began to shake unnervingly. Maria quickly ended the call and rushed upstairs to see what was happening. Meanwhile, Avery lied on the phone, claiming to be in a meeting, but he was actually sneaking away to have an affair with Lucilia. At the same time, Maria saw Susie cowering in fear on the bed, saying that a terrifying ghost had appeared in the room. Initially, Maria thought it was just a nightmare and was about to go outside to get a blanket when something strange happened. Water began to seep out from under the bathroom door, and when Maria opened the door to check, she found the bathtub overflowing, with her deceased daughter lying inside. Heartbroken, Maria approached and embraced her, speaking words of longing, but she failed to notice that the spirit had already possessed Susie. Elsewhere, even though the plant creature had gained immense power after mutating, it still longed for its human appearance and wished to return to its old life. Suddenly, the consciousness of the swamp awoke and quickly used vines to restrain the plant creature, causing it to experience terrifying hallucinations. The area became filled with countless corpses, and the plant creature was overwhelmed with fear, letting out a huge roar before finally breaking free from the vines. At that moment, a stranger approached by boat, but he wasn't a real human. He was a manifestation of nature's consciousness, urging Alec to keep his faith and not let his appearance affect his heart. Meanwhile, Daniel packed his bags, ready to leave the town, believing that he had completed the witch's mission by saving Abby. As he was about to drive away, he hesitated and decided to stop. He got out of the car and slowly walked across the town's boundary, but his hand immediately burst into flames, causing him to collapse in agony. It turned out that the devil's curse had not yet been lifted, so he had to abandon the idea of leaving, regretting ever making a deal with the devil. Not only was he unable to achieve his dream of stardom, but he also couldn't escape this eerie town. At that moment, the devil's power suddenly awakened and took refuge in a mask. Meanwhile, Avery had just paused for a break, and although he wanted to continue, Lucilia was already exhausted and was getting ready to change and head back to the police station. During their conversation, Avery learned some shocking news. It turned out that Liz had found a lead and decided to use her position as a journalist to investigate, to prevent the media from taking credit for solving the case. Lucilia had no choice but to reopen the investigation to find Alec's killer first. This made Avery worried, and he showed a heavy expression. Elsewhere, Abby recorded her research logs, discovering that the cells in the sample taken from the plant creature could not only shapeshift at will but also had infinite regenerative abilities, completely defying biological norms. Jason, who was eavesdropping at the door, asked about the source of the plant sample and suggested that if it were properly utilized, it could spark a medical revolution that would allow humanity to conquer all diseases. During their conversation, he speculated that the sample was related to Alec, but Abby, concerned about potential trouble, didn't reveal any information about the plant creature. Just then, she received a call from Susie and made an excuse to leave the scene in a hurry. Meanwhile, Avery was using the restaurant's kitchen without permission, claiming he just suddenly wanted some soup and had no other intentions. This made the manager feel uneasy, sensing that something wasn't right, but since Avery was the town's largest landowner, owning most of the property, including the restaurant, the manager had no choice but to allow it. Avery then issued a stern warning to Liz, urging her to stop investigating the case, or both she and her father would face trouble. When Liz arrived at the restaurant, she made it clear that even if her father's life was threatened, she would continue investigating to find out who killed Alec. This infuriated Avery, who angrily stormed out of the restaurant. Elsewhere, Jason hired a boatman to take him to the lab, where he discovered strange footprints on the ground that didn't resemble human tracks. He collected samples from the site and realized they matched Abby's samples. Suspecting that they came from some large creature, the stranger took the plant creature to a part of the swamp where many century-old trees held vast amounts of memory. Under the guidance of nature's consciousness, the plant creature learned to use a new ability. When communicating with the trees, it saw scenes from years ago, including a young Abby searching tirelessly for her missing friend. The plant creature was about to step forward to help when it realized these were past events. At that moment, the stranger suddenly vanished, and elsewhere, Abby received a notice and went to the mansion. Upstairs, Susie was humming a tune, her best friend's favorite song, which greatly surprised Abby, prompting her to go upstairs and check. She found Susie sitting on the bed, and when she examined Susie's health, she found nothing wrong, but Susie's way of speaking was eerily similar to her best friend's. Even during their conversation, she called Abby by a nickname only they knew. Initially thinking it was a prank by Maria, Abby was about to leave when the door suddenly slammed shut on its own. Her best friend's appearance turned terrifying as she accused Abby of what happened on the bridge, urging her to die in the swamp to atone for her actions. She then began spewing mud and venomous words from her mouth, and Abby, unable to accept any of it, angrily gathered her things and left. Downstairs, Abby confronted Maria, warning her to stop misleading Susie, but Maria was convinced that the spirit was indeed her daughter who had passed away years ago. Refusing to discuss it any further, as Abby left the mansion, she encountered the witch, who warned that Maria was being possessed by an evil spirit and was in imminent danger, but it was already too late, as Maria, under the spirit's influence, drove away from the mansion. Meanwhile, Lucilia intercepted a tip and went to the woods, where she learned that a camper had been hunting nearby on the night Alec died. The camper not only witnessed the murder but also found a wrapper for explosives at the scene. Lucilia then uncovered the shocking truth. The killer was her own son, Matt. He had been driving Avery's boat, and the camper, fearing for his life, quickly grabbed a shotgun and demanded a large sum of money as hush money. Otherwise, he threatened to expose the truth. But Lucilia, pretending to be distressed, swiftly drew her gun and shot him in a vital spot when he let his guard down. She then delivered a stern warning, telling him not to mess with the wrong people in his next life. To protect her son, Lucilia ruthlessly silenced the camper and staged the scene to look like a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Elsewhere, Susie lured Maria to the swamp, where the ghostly image of her best friend emerged from the water. Although Maria felt a tinge of fear, she bravely approached for the sake of her daughter. At that moment, the spirit left Susie's body, and she collapsed from exhaustion just as Abby arrived at the bridge. Abby found Maria's car near the bridge, and Susie, now back to normal, ran over, saying that the ghost's plan was nearly successful. Abby quickly called the police and then headed into the swamp alone to investigate. Seeing Maria standing inexplicably in the water, she hurried forward to stop her from doing something foolish, repeatedly apologizing and expressing her daily guilt. But Maria, now possessed, suddenly turned and attacked, nearly drowning Abby in the water. Luckily, after a desperate struggle, Abby managed to escape the peril. The spirit then switched targets and dragged Maria deep into the water. Abby was frantic with worry but couldn't find any trace of Maria. At that moment, the plant creature responded to Abby's call and brought Maria out of the water. After a strenuous rescue effort, Maria was finally out of danger, leaving Abby devastated and blaming herself for everything. The plant creature then used a new ability to connect with nature, allowing Abby to see the memories stored within the trees. The vision took her back to the day of the incident when she and her best friend drove to the bridge. Her friend, already drunk, decided to do something bold before graduation and suggested they both jump off the bridge as a crazy challenge. Abby playfully agreed but impulsively pushed her friend off the bridge first, but she quickly realized something was wrong when her friend didn't resurface, so she jumped in to rescue her. Her friend emerged, laughing at Abby's terrified expression, but suddenly, something strange happened. Her friend seemed to be attacked by an unseen force and was pulled under the water. At first, Abby thought it was another prank, but when she dove under to check, her friend had been dragged into the depths and disappeared. Returning to the present, Abby finally understood that she wasn't responsible for her friend's death. It was caused by some terrifying dark force. Though still saddened, she was able to let go of the guilt that had haunted her. Just then, Matt arrived nearby, calling out Abby's name, and the plant creature quickly retreated. hiding behind the trees to observe. Seeing Matt's caring behavior as he draped a jacket over Abby to keep her warm left the plant creature with a heavy heart. Elsewhere, as Liz was preparing to leave work and go home, she discovered that her car's tires had been slashed, with a small knife left in one of them. Luckily, Daniel happened to be nearby and rushed over to help, but he was suddenly attacked by a masked figure, who knocked him to the ground, leaving him bleeding heavily. Realizing the trouble he had caused, the masked man quickly fled the scene. Meanwhile, Avery arrived at the hospital to check on his wife's condition, only to be stopped by Jason. Jason revealed that the plant sample Abby had obtained came from a massive living organism. He explained that capturing this creature could lead to a groundbreaking advancement and generate enormous commercial profits. Avery then introduced Jason to a top hunter, instructing him to organize a capture mission. Over here in the woods, they saw a tied-up rabbit. Although it seemed unusual, they still went ahead to rescue it, only to fall into a trap set by a snare. It turned out this was a hunter's setup, and the hunter was hiding in the distance, using a tranquilizer gun to attack. An enraged Swamp Thing forcibly broke the sturdy trap and escaped the range of the tranquilizer gun. This left the two hunters utterly shocked, realizing they were dealing with the strongest prey they had ever encountered. The custom-made reinforced trap was strong enough that even an elephant couldn't easily break it, and the tranquilizer gun they used was powerful enough to bring down an entire zoo. Yet it had no effect on Swamp Thing. As Swamp Thing emerged from behind the trees, the terrified hunters opened fire, only to discover that bullets couldn't hurt him, so they decided to flee back to their boat. Swamp Thing used his immense strength to shake the trees, sending sharp splinters flying toward the hunters. With a fierce series of attacks, the two hunters were quickly wounded, and despite their pain, they ran for their lives. Meanwhile, Jason used Abby's sample for research and created a new type of mutation serum, secretly injecting it into 4 drips in the hospital to observe its effects on human subjects. On the other side, Daniel, gravely injured, fell into a coma, and his friend Liz discovered that his background was very mysterious. Not only were there no family contacts in his phone, but there were no friends from outside the town. Seeing that there was no hope for recovery, Liz felt immense guilt and confessed that all this happened because they provoked Avery. Unfortunately, she had no evidence, and she suspected that Lucilia had already been bought off. Learning the truth shocked Abby. Furious, she left the hospital and confronted Avery, telling him that Daniel was in a permanent coma and might never wake up. But Avery showed no guilt and openly admitted his wrongdoing. He warned Abby to leave town immediately, or she would get dragged into more trouble. After a heated argument, they parted ways in anger. Meanwhile, the two hunters were brought to the hospital, covered in splinters. They kept shouting about being attacked by a monster, and the observant Liz deduced that this must have been the work of Swamp Thing. This made Abby worried, but she still believed that Swamp Thing wouldn't harm anyone without reason, so she went to the swamp to check on the situation. On the other side, Lucilia felt guilty about the murder, but Matt didn't care, saying it was just one life lost. Lucilia, as a mother, was shocked by her son's cold-blooded attitude and angrily slapped him. That's when Matt revealed the shocking truth. He followed orders to kill Alec to protect his mother. It turned out that Avery had incriminating evidence against Lucilia, proving she had taken large amounts of dirty money. These crimes were enough to sentence her to life in prison. So, Matt had become an accomplice to avoid Avery exposing his mother's secrets. Seeing her son being manipulated, Lucilia started to have thoughts of revenge. Just then, a subordinate reported that the hunters had been attacked by some kind of fierce animal, and Matt headed to the swamp to investigate. Meanwhile, a nurse came to change the 4, unaware that it had already been injected with the mutation serum. Before long, Daniel started to experience strange changes. As the machines beeped an alarm, Liz noticed that Daniel's heart rate was skyrocketing. In the next second, he suddenly woke up, writhing in pain, with his skin burning like fire, scaring Liz away. Hearing the commotion, Jason rushed in and immediately took Daniel out of the hospital to continue observing the changes, avoiding interference from the doctors that could affect the serum's results. Meanwhile, Abby arrived at the swamp, calling out for Swamp Thing, believing that he only hurt the hunters in self-defense. But as the rumors of the monster spread throughout the town, Swamp Thing grew more and more dejected, starting to doubt himself, wondering if he was indeed just a terrible creature. Abby kept offering comforting words, promising that they would find a way to reverse his condition. Suddenly, a boat appeared in the distance, and Swamp Thing immediately went on alert, saying the hunters wouldn't give up so easily, preparing for battle and retreating into the forest to set an ambush. Meanwhile, Jason urgently met with Avery in private. Although the hired hunters failed to capture the swamp creature, they succeeded in developing a new drug. Not only had it brought brain-dead Daniel back to life, but it might also cure all sorts of terminal illnesses. Seeing the massive commercial potential, Avery was thrilled. To attract the world's wealthiest investors, he ordered Jason to prepare a presentation immediately. Elsewhere, Matt and his team arrived at the swamp, discovering huge footprints on the ground that didn't match any known animal. Sensing something unusual, they grabbed their guns and entered the forest to investigate. Matt instructed his partner to patrol the shoreline with the boat, trying to locate the mysterious creature. As they ventured deeper into the woods, something suddenly approached them. Abby arrived and warned them to leave the swamp immediately. But before she could finish speaking, Swamp Thing launched a swift attack. Abby rushed to intervene, saving Matt from harm, explaining that the creature in front of them was Alec. Although Alec survived the explosion, his body was transformed by some kind of chemical, and now he was searching for a cure. Feeling guilty, Matt asked Alec about what had happened to him, but Alec only remembered being attacked from the shadows and didn't see the attacker's face. In the end, Matt reported back, falsely claiming that there was nothing in the woods, and outwardly kept Abby's secret safe. Elsewhere, Carolyn was woken up by a voice outside. Suddenly, Daniel knocked on the window, desperately calling for help. Jason rushed outside to check on the situation, discovering that Daniel's body was emitting white smoke and seemed to be undergoing some unknown transformation, with blue flames starting to flicker around him. Just then, Avery fired a warning shot, telling him not to get any closer to Jason. However, the bullet did no harm, and Daniel, terrified, ran to Jason for help. Seeing that no one was willing to assist him, Daniel prepared to unleash his anger and energy, but Carolyn quickly stepped forward and injected him with tranquilizer, finally bringing the situation under control. Although Avery was dissatisfied, he didn't want to halt the project and ordered Jason to find a solution quickly. Meanwhile, after a series of ordeals, Matt finally returned to the station. He then told his mother everything and prepared to kill Alec once again. Meanwhile, Daniel was taken to the hospital, and the witch, who had already seen through fate, knew that her mission was not yet over. To lift the persistent demon curse, she was about to face an even more dangerous challenge. She then used powerful magic to ease Daniel's suffering. As the mysterious power flowed into his body, the blue glow in his eyes began to fade, and his condition stabilized. Elsewhere, Swamp Thing returned to the lab and remembered his moments with Abby, feeling a sense of nostalgia. Although he desperately wanted to return to his human form, he didn't know where to begin. He also worried that the longer he remained a monster, the more he would lose himself and grow distant from Abby. With this deep yearning, Swamp Thing suddenly awakened a new ability. Mysterious flowers bloomed in his hand, releasing a hallucinogenic powder. While the two of them were confused by this, Abby was moved to tears, suddenly seeing Alec appear as a human again. Seeing that he had temporarily shed his monstrous form, Alec took the chance to express his feelings, hoping they could enjoy a happy moment together to avoid any future regrets. Although Abby felt the same, she was too hungry after a long day. Alec quickly opened a cabinet to grab some cookies. Just then, a sound came from outside, and thick leaves quickly rushed into the room. It turned out that Alec had not only gained supernatural powers but could also control plant growth with his mind, causing tree branches to bring in fresh fruit. Abby took a bite and discovered the fruit was incredibly sweet. Curious about everything, she asked about his other abilities. Alec explained that his senses were extraordinarily sharp and that he could hear the voices of plants. He also mentioned that there was a decayed area nearby, overtaken by dark forces, where the plants were dying in pain. Determined to find a cure for her beloved, Abby decided to take the risk and investigate the area. She believed the plants growing in the dangerous zone might be key to creating the most effective antidote. Despite Alec's objections, she insisted on taking a boat to the decayed area. Meanwhile, Avery arranged to meet with the world's wealthiest investor that evening, but Jason's presentation was overly complicated, causing Avery some frustration. At the same time, Maria was preparing a delicious meal, hoping to win the investor's favor. Her thoughtful gesture delighted her husband, who embraced her happily. Just then, Lucilia arrived unannounced, interrupting their moment of happiness. She claimed there were some police matters that she needed to discuss privately with Avery. Once they entered the study, Lucilia lashed out in anger, admitting that while she had always known Avery was evil, she never expected to fall into his trap and have her son dragged into a murder plot. She was furious. Lucilia also revealed that Alec hadn't died but had been infected by a virus, becoming Swamp Thing. She warned that they needed to go to the swamp immediately to silence him before Alec returned to town to expose the truth, which would send them all to prison. Avery was skeptical but told his wife that he needed to step out for a while, promising to be back before the investor arrived. Meanwhile, Abby reached the mysterious part of the swamp, filled with Alec's joy. Beautiful flowers bloomed all around, and even young Anne, who had grown up in the town, marveled at the sight. Although it defied all scientific understanding, everyone felt a sense of happiness. Alec had not only gained the power of nature but also understood deeper secrets, explaining that the earth held both light and dark forces, and balance was essential. Without balance, death would spread, leading to a devastating disaster. They arrived at the decayed area, a lifeless zone caused by human destruction, where the dark forces had risen from the earth. Despite Alec's warnings, Abby insisted on collecting plant samples from the area for her mutation research. Elsewhere, Maria followed a secret plan and visited Jason, inquiring about his experimental skills. She wanted to ensure that with ample resources, they could develop the serum on schedule without any side effects. Although the doctor wasn't fully confident, he felt confused about the conversation, thinking that everything should be reported to Avery. Maria, however, took charge, declaring that her husband would never return and that she would be taking over all decisions, continuing to fund the research. Seeing that the ultimate goal hadn't changed, the doctor agreed to attend the evening meeting. Meanwhile, Lucilia arrived deep in the swamp by boat, loading her rifle, seemingly ready to commit murder. Avery grew nervous, suspecting Lucilia might have other plans. During their conversation, Avery admitted his motive for killing Alec. Alec had uncovered illegal secrets and was digging deeper into his investigation. Worried that the plan would be ruined, Avery had ordered Matt to carry out the assassination and covered up the evidence, claiming it was all for the town's development. Feeling guilty, Avery suggested he be the one to shoot and end this. Lucilia reluctantly handed over the weapon and led the way. Meanwhile, Abby felt an unprecedented pressure as they entered the decayed zone, where everything was filled with withered plants corrupted by darkness. Alec stopped, warning that they couldn't stay there any longer, but Abby, having found a sea of animal corpses, ignored the danger and collected samples. Suddenly, she was attacked by dark forces, her arm caught tightly by tree branches. Although Alec helped her escape, her arm was cut and bleeding profusely. After quickly bandaging the wound, they fled the decayed area as a fierce wave of dark energy approached, toppling trees in its path. Elsewhere, Lucilia wandered through the dust-covered woods but couldn't find any trace of Alec. Sensing something was wrong, Avery loaded his rifle, preparing to kill Lucilia, believing that bringing her to such a remote place was the perfect opportunity to dispose of her. He knew Lucilia was not someone to be trifled with and would never let someone who used her son go unpunished. Just as he was about to pull the trigger and kill her, Lucilia, trying to buy some time, suggested they do something exciting in the wild together. Avery hesitated for a moment but ultimately decided to shoot to eliminate the threat. At that moment, Matt launched a surprise attack from behind, saving his mother and knocking Avery unconscious. Lucilia, skilled at covering her tracks, didn't want to leave any blood at the scene, so she decided to drag Avery to the boat and finish the job there. Meanwhile, the world's wealthiest man arrived at the mansion for his meeting, feeling a bit frustrated when he heard Avery hadn't returned yet. Finally, after being warmly welcomed by Maria, he agreed to come inside and enjoy the meal. At the same time, Alec and Abby returned to the lab, only to find Abby's wound worsening as the poison continued to spread through her body. Alec realized this was the work of dark forces. As a disease specialist, Abby knew she didn't have much time left. Seeing she couldn't make it to the hospital, Alec focused his thoughts. In response, nature sent thick vines through the window, carrying healing herbs, but the dark power was too deeply rooted. And after taking the herbs, the poison in Abby's body reacted violently, causing her to cry out in pain. Meanwhile, Lucilia sailed to the dumping site. As Avery began to regain consciousness, he revealed a long-kept secret. He told Matt that if he pulled the trigger, he would have to live with the guilt of killing his own father. It turned out Lucilia had known the truth all along but never shared it with her son. Avery had secretly bribed a doctor to confirm the results of a paternity test, leaving Matt stunned, questioning his mother. As mother and son argued, Avery took the opportunity to attack with a knife. Lucilia quickly grabbed a shotgun to defend herself, managing to shoot Avery in the leg, but he escaped by diving into the water. Seeing no sign of him on the surface, they assumed his body had sunk, and Lucilia hurried away to tend to her son's wounds. Back at the lab, Abby was still in excruciating pain as the dark power overwhelmed her, preventing the healing herbs from taking effect. Alec suddenly had an idea. He opened Abby's clothes and used his supernatural abilities to accelerate the growth of the herbs inside her body, using vines to cleanse the toxins. Meanwhile, the wealthy man, having finished his meal, grew impatient and scolded Maria for Avery's tardiness, reminding her that this meeting was incredibly rare. Maria, who had everything planned out, quickly shared the research results. She explained that a brain-dead patient had been diagnosed as permanently comatose. Yet after being injected with Dr. Jason's serum, they miraculously recovered within half a day. The wealthy man, now intrigued, agreed to continue the meal. He praised Maria's cooking and signed a secret contract for a massive investment. Back at the lab, Abby slowly regained consciousness, realizing that Alec had saved her life and stayed by her side. She sincerely expressed her love for him and kissed him in return. After the meeting, Jason was overjoyed, knowing he would soon receive a huge research fund and a professional team. This would not only accelerate his experiments but also make his wife the first beneficiary. However, Carolyn seemed confused and had completely forgotten the details of the meeting. Jason realized her condition had worsened again and resolved to speed up the project to cure her memory loss. Lucilia then arrived at the mansion with her severely injured son. It turned out that this was all part of Maria's plan. By getting rid of her husband, she could seize all the power, and Lucilia could take her revenge, ensuring her son was no longer exploited while also earning a hefty reward. Both women had their reasons, and together they conspired to eliminate their common enemy. After his harrowing experience, Alec asked his love to never return to the swamp. He wanted her to go back to the city, live a normal life, and enjoy the life she deserved. Alec, bearing the burden of maintaining the swamp's balance, stayed behind. As the transformation wore off, Swamp Thing reverted to his monstrous form, speaking sorrowfully as he pushed Abby away. Abby then drove out of town, informing Liz of her plan. She intended to bring the samples from the rot to the disease center for comprehensive research, hoping to create a cure using the center's resources. Meanwhile, a mysterious voice emerged from the swamp. It was Avery, who hadn't died. He painfully crawled back onto the shore. At the disease center, Abby handed over the samples from the rot to the analysis department for thorough testing. She also warned them that the substance was toxic and instructed the team to handle it with caution. At that moment, the newly appointed deputy director came in, repeatedly reprimanding Abby for neglecting her duties, not only for staying in town against orders but also for not reporting her daily progress on time. The local doctor also expressed dissatisfaction, complaining that Abby spent all her time in the swamp and only occasionally showed up at the hospital. In response, the deputy director decided to conduct a strict evaluation and warned her not to violate orders again. Meanwhile, Avery, stumbling through the forest trying to find his way, was suddenly influenced by the dark forces and saw a hallucination of Lucilia. Terrified, he collapsed to the ground, begging for his life as he thought she was about to shoot him. In the end, Lucilia didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she inexplicably turned and walked away, leaving Avery confused. Just as he was about to chase after her to ask what was going on, vines sprouted from Lucilia's face, transforming her into a grotesque, bloody monster that began to approach him. But in the blink of an eye, the image vanished, and Avery realized it was all just a hallucination. Meanwhile, the wealthy investor visited Jason and told him that this project was incredibly unique. Not only would it change the future of humanity, but it also involved enormous commercial interests. To prevent any information from leaking, they would build the lab on Maria's estate. They would also send in a large team of researchers so that Jason could complete the task as quickly as possible. At this point, Avery, having lost too much blood, could no longer move and was about to lie down to rest when he suddenly saw Swamp Thing standing in front of him with a menacing expression. Meanwhile, Abby was at home, waiting for the results of the test. A colleague brought food over, and they happily had dinner together. During the meal, Abby confessed the hidden truth, revealing that Alec had undergone a strange transformation and suspected it was related to the town's outbreak. However, the situation had surpassed the boundaries of science, and in order to prevent Alec from becoming a lab specimen, she decided to investigate the swamp alone. After being severely frightened, Avery fainted and later awoke in a lab, discovering vines implanted in his leg, wriggling inside his wound. Panicking, he quickly ripped them out and threw them to the ground. Just then, Swamp Thing appeared, stopping him and explaining that the vines were medicinal plants that would cleanse the infection and speed up cell regeneration. This left Avery utterly shocked, finally realizing that Lucilia hadn't lied. Alec had not only survived but had become the terrifying Swamp Thing. Avery began to plead, trying to gain sympathy, but Swamp Thing angrily stepped forward, accusing Avery of showing no remorse. He blamed Avery for destroying the environment, leading to the rise of dark forces, and for turning him into a monster. Meanwhile, Abby explained Alec's transformation, noting that not only had his body been overtaken by vines, but he could also control plants and even access the consciousness of nature itself. He could see the memories of what had happened in the swamp. Although this sounded ridiculous, like a made-up story, Abby's colleague had seen similar phenomena, like bodies growing branches, and had contracted the town's disease. Thus, he believed everything Abby said. They decided to join forces and investigate together to find a way to help Swamp Thing regain his human form, which deeply moved Abby. They agreed to start the research the next day. As the colleague headed home, he was ambushed on the street by strangers, kidnapped, and thrown into a car, all while Abby remained unaware in her apartment. On the other side, Avery had realized that Swamp Thing desperately wanted to return to his original form and that he had a close relationship with Abby. Avery then began to spin lies, claiming he would use all available resources to help restore Alec's humanity. He also mentioned that Jason had already been brought to the town, describing him as a legendary figure in the scientific community and a leading expert in genetics. This filled Swamp Thing with hope, and he began to trust Avery. He then commanded the surrounding plants to move a small boat closer and explained that the swamp had originally wanted Avery, with his insatiable greed, to die, but Swamp Thing couldn't bear to let him die, so he saved him. When Avery saw the boat approaching, he was overjoyed and made a promise. He said he would bring Jason the next day to help treat Alec, and soon, Alec would be human again. The next morning, Abby went to the analysis department to check the report, but her access card suddenly lost its privileges, leaving her confused. The deputy director arrived and explained the situation, informing her that the samples had been placed under strict quarantine and that no one was allowed to see the analysis report. She also lied, saying that there was a sudden outbreak abroad and her colleague had been sent out early that morning. Without further explanation, she led Abby into a meeting room. At that moment, the wealthy investor entered through another door and explained that he had spoken with her colleague the previous night and was well aware of the situation with Swamp Thing. He said he hoped they could work together to treat the patient. Otherwise, they would have to resort to force to prevent the monster from becoming a threat to the world. He emphasized that it wasn't about making money but that they were preparing to capture Swamp Thing and bring him into a lab. Abby quickly realized something was wrong and saw through the investor's bad intentions. She refused his offer to collaborate and warned him not to disturb Swamp Thing in the swamp. She then left a voicemail for her colleague, saying she was heading to town. Meanwhile, Avery returned to town and immediately visited Jason, showing him the gunshot wound on his leg that had healed in a way he had never seen before. He recounted his experience in the swamp and confirmed that Alec had become some kind of creature. However, Jason wasn't surprised, revealing that the wealthy investor had already gathered this information. As they talked, Avery learned about the betrayal and realized that Lucilia's assassination attempt had been a plot she and his wife had conspired together. Furious, Avery decided to take revenge, but first, he mentioned the idea of curing Alec as a way to repay his life-saving debt. Jason was shocked and explained that if Alec were to return to human form, he would lose his extraordinary regenerative abilities, making him worthless in commercial terms. The wealthy investor's collaboration would fall apart, and after more convincing from Alec, the greedy Avery saw an opportunity and chose profit over loyalty. Late at night, the two arrived at the meeting spot, where Swamp Thing showed up and immediately recognized the famous Jason. Swamp Thing expressed his desire to return to human form, and Jason quickly agreed to help, suggesting they go to the lab for treatment. However, Swamp Thing explained that ever since the mutation, he had been trapped in the swamp and couldn't leave. Through his connection with nature, he sensed that a group of soldiers was approaching from afar and quickly fled. It turned out that, with the investor's help, a large group of elite mercenaries had been brought in. Although each of them had extensive battlefield experience and completed many difficult missions, none dared attack Swamp Thing head-on. Swamp Thing transformed his arm into a sharp spike and warned them to leave the swamp immediately, or they would all die. Suddenly, the mercenaries launched an attack, trying to suppress him with freezing gas, leading to a fierce battle. One by one, the mercenaries were killed, and Avery cautiously approached, picking up a hunting rifle that had fallen on the ice. As the smoke cleared, Swamp Thing launched a sudden assault. Avery took the chance to shoot, wounding Swamp Thing, who had been caught off guard. The mercenaries quickly focused their firepower, unleashing freezing gas upon him. Swamp Thing was finally frozen into an ice sculpture and lost consciousness, unable to use his powers. Later, Abby arrived at the scene, finding only large amounts of ammunition and traces left by the freezing gas. Sometime later, Swamp Thing was transported to a secret facility. On the outside, it looked like an abandoned building, but inside, it housed a fully equipped lab. Swamp Thing remained in a frozen state, lying on a surgical table, completely at the mercy of the researchers. Meanwhile, Abby met with Liz at a diner and explained how she found bullet shells and drag marks in the swamp. She also mentioned that she had been mysteriously suspended by headquarters, and her colleague had been sent abroad. She suspected this was all part of Avery's conspiracy, leaving no one to help Swamp Thing. Liz, being a loyal friend, immediately agreed to help investigate and suggested they head to Jason's house to look for clues. At the same time, Avery arrived at the lab, where Swamp Thing was still unconscious, fully restrained. Jason used a powerful green light to suppress the regenerative abilities of the plant cells. To ensure nothing went wrong, the lab had a backup generator, and they began preparing to thaw Swamp Thing and start the brutal dissection. Meanwhile, Daniel slowly recovered from his coma, only to be greeted by the unexpected arrival of the Demon Man. Daniel quickly recognized him as the person he had made a deal with and began complaining about everything that had happened, asking how to break the curse. The Demon Man used his powers to show Daniel a vision of the future. In the vision, Abby was seen entering a mysterious facility, where she encountered trouble with a reporter. In the end, they were both surrounded by mercenaries and killed in a hail of bullets. The Demon Man warned that this future was set to happen, and only Daniel could stop it. Elsewhere, Abby and Liz visited Jason's house, but Carolyn didn't know where her husband had gone. The two entered the house, and Abby noticed some memory loss pills on the table. Seeing Carolyn's strange behavior, she realized these were late-stage symptoms. Liz, being observant, spotted a suspicious design on the table and discreetly took it when no one was looking. Their conversation with Carolyn yielded no useful information, so they left to continue searching for clues. Back at the lab, Jason began dissecting Swamp Thing's body, but the outer layer had hardened so much that he had to tear it off with brute force. Suddenly, Swamp Thing woke up and demanded to know what Jason was doing. Meanwhile, Abby visited the hospital and asked all the staff about Jason, discovering that he hadn't shown up for days and had likely moved to another location. From the designs Liz had taken, they deduced that the lab was mobile and located at an abandoned factory recently purchased by Avery. Its layout matched the design. The two decided to investigate the site, hoping to find Swamp Thing. Despite Swamp Thing's pleas, Jason continued with the dissection, explaining his research findings. Seeing that Swamp Thing's internal organs were being protected by tree roots, Jason used a saw to cut through them and heartlessly removed each organ for study. Swamp Thing felt immense sadness but could only watch helplessly as Jason dissected him. Jason then made a major discovery. The plant-constructed organs actually had no function. Even without the heart, the body could still operate normally, meaning that the real Alec had already died. The plant life had somehow absorbed Alec's memories, replicating similar organs and creating a creature with human consciousness. But ultimately, it was just a giant plant and could never become human again. Swamp Thing was devastated by this revelation, unable to accept the cruel reality. Meanwhile, Daniel learned that his destiny was to play the role of the devil and become a superhero to save the girls. Daniel was confused, thinking the Blue Devil was just a movie character, and wearing the costume wouldn't grant him any real power. The Demon Man denied this and handed him the Blue Devil mask used in the movie, then used his supernatural abilities to release Daniel from his restraints. He warned Daniel to make the right choice before silently walking away. Although Daniel wanted to escape from it all, he couldn't ignore the safety of the girls. He ultimately decided to wear the mask to fight evil, and as soon as he put it on, it glowed and emitted a powerful energy, transforming Daniel into the Blue Devil with supernatural powers. Meanwhile, Maria kept trying to contact the investor, but his assistant coldly rejected her calls, refusing to give any response. At that moment, her husband appeared with a psychiatrist, explaining that they had obtained an official court order. Maria was forcibly taken to a mental institution by medical personnel. Meanwhile, Abby followed the address to the abandoned factory, where the two of them carefully avoided numerous guards and quietly entered through the back door. Suddenly, branches sprouted from the ground and formed a guiding path, and they realized this was a signal left by Swamp Thing. Following the branches, they arrived at a hall, but guards were approaching from the other direction. Just as they were about to hide in the control room, Liz accidentally kicked a metal rod, causing a clanging sound. The mercenaries immediately came to investigate and sensed intruders hiding in the control room. Thinking quickly, Abby shut off the power, plunging the hall into darkness. However, the mercenaries calmly turned on their flashlights and prepared to break into the control room. Suddenly, a loud noise came from behind them, and they all turned to look. A blue fireball flew in, hitting a mercenary, who cried out in pain. Though no one could be seen, the group panicked and started firing wildly. As the burning mercenary turned to ash, They calmed down and began searching the area for the intruder. The Blue Devil struck again, instantly consuming the soul of one mercenary. Seeing this, the others opened fire, but their bullets had no effect. The Blue Devil then went on a killing spree, turning the area into a living hell. Meanwhile, Jason continued his experiment, unaffected, but after being warned by the mercenaries, he left the scene with the organ samples. Abby, unaware of what was happening outside, was startled when a wounded mercenary opened the door and told her about the terrifying demon. Before he could finish speaking, the Blue Devil killed him, leaving both Abby and Liz stunned, unable to believe what they had just seen. After the Blue Devil left, Abby decided to go out and look for Swamp Thing, only to find the scene outside littered with corpses, as if a war had taken place. The two of them entered the lab and found Swamp Thing in a terrible state. Abby quickly destroyed the restraints and shut off the green light that was suppressing the plants. Seeing her love brutally dissected, Abby was heartbroken, but once the plants regained their regenerative ability, Swamp Thing's hollowed-out organs were restored by the plant cells. This confirmed Jason's theory that Swamp Thing was just a mutated plant organism. Swamp Thing decided to return to the swamp to investigate the site of his murder. Though Abby didn't fully understand, she followed him back to the swamp. As everyone left the factory, Daniel woke up in human form, seeing himself completely naked and surrounded by dead bodies. He was terrified and quickly fled the scene. Meanwhile, Liz decided to return to the factory to investigate the mercenaries' identities and use the media to expose Avery's conspiracy. Elsewhere, Matt, drunk, was driving recklessly, and in his dazed state, he caused a serious car accident, leaving his fate unknown. Jason happily returned home with the samples, believing that using these plant organs would help him develop a cure for memory loss. But when he went to share the news with his wife, he realized something was terribly wrong. During his absence, she had suffered another attack and taken all her pills at once. The overdose caused severe side effects, leaving her body trembling uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Avery visited his wife in the psychiatric ward, confessing that he had bribed a powerful judge, ensuring she would never be released. Under Avery's questioning, his wife confessed that she had ordered the assassination purely out of revenge for his years of infidelity. She also celebrated how Avery had stolen her wealth for his own gain, leading to a heated argument that ended poorly. Back at the swamp, Abby watched anxiously as Swamp Thing, without explanation, walked into the water like a lifeless body. She stayed on the shore, worried but waiting. After a while, Swamp Thing resurfaced, carrying a body in his arms. It was the real Alec. The creature before her was just a humanoid plant. Never able to become human, Swamp Thing collapsed to his knees in despair. Abby comforted him, saying that Swamp Thing had inherited Alec's consciousness and had helped the town through the outbreak and saved her life in a crisis. She urged Swamp Thing to hold on to hope, even if he could never be human, and to start a new chapter in his life. Suddenly, Swamp Thing sensed something was wrong and stood up. Alert, he realized another group of soldiers was coming for him, likely seeking revenge. Determined to fight back, Swamp Thing vowed not to let them succeed again and dragged Alec's body into the water to hide it. The next morning, Abby returned to the diner and told her friend everything, admitting that although she had pretended to be strong in front of Swamp Thing, she was deeply saddened inside. She wished the real Alec could come back. After some comforting words from Liz, they decided to find out who was behind everything. Abby then headed to the mental hospital, hoping to get information from Maria. Meanwhile, due to the overdose, Carolyn developed locked-in syndrome. Though her body was stiff and immobile, her mind remained fully conscious. She was tied to a chair by her husband, feeling an overwhelming sense of fear. Jason, however, was thrilled. He presented her with all the organ samples, explaining that they contained miraculous cells. He believed that if she consumed these organs, she would gain the same regenerative abilities and heal her deteriorating brain. At the same time, the wealthy investor hired an army and purchased a large stock of weapons, ordering them to kill Swamp Thing once and for all. Determined not to fail again, they planned to use the body for research instead. Avery rushed to stop them, warning that using heavy weapons would destroy the samples and halt the project. The investor, furious, blamed Avery for their losses during the last attempt to capture Swamp Thing, which had cost many lives and led to the destruction of the lab. Seeking revenge, the investor ignored Avery's concerns, determined to kill Swamp Thing and take all the research for himself. Elsewhere, Lucilia arrived at the hospital and, after speaking with the doctors, learned that her son had been in a serious car accident. Luckily, the treatment had gone well, and he was expected to recover soon, much to Lucilia's relief. Meanwhile, Liz visited Daniel at his rental shop, where he was packing up. preparing to leave town. During their conversation, Liz confirmed her suspicions, realizing that Daniel was the Blue Devil who had stormed the factory. She was shocked but grateful for him saving her life. Satisfied with what he had achieved, Daniel decided to head to the big city and become a superhero. He would continue fighting crime elsewhere, leaving the shop in Liz's care, saying his final goodbye before driving away. Feeling both relieved and excited, Maria, locked in the hospital room, began to lose her mind as she was forced to take large doses of medication. Her mental state deteriorated, and terrifying hallucinations of evil spirits demanding her life appeared. The witch came to visit and woke Maria from her nightmare, explaining that all this suffering was due to her mistake in summoning her daughter's spirit, which accidentally called forth the dark forces of the swamp. The nightmares would only get worse, and they would continue until death stopped the torment. At Maria's request, the witch cast an irreversible spell. Meanwhile, the wealthy investor joined the soldiers on a hunt through the forest, where they soon discovered Swamp Thing's tracks. Confirming that they had entered the target's territory, they sent one of their men ahead as bait to lure the creature into their attack range. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound from the bushes, signaling that the creature was about to attack. The soldier immediately opened fire, but he didn't hit anything. While reloading, he fell into a trap set by Swamp Thing, and the forest echoed with his painful screams. Elsewhere, Abby arrived at the hospital room but realized she was too late. After the witch's spell, Maria had been freed from her suffering, her mind now permanently lost in a fantasy world where she happily lived with her daughter. Seeing that Maria was beyond communication, Abby reluctantly turned and left. Meanwhile, Jason had turned the organ samples into a disgusting meal, which he presented to his wife, explaining that it was Swamp Thing's heart, containing miraculous cells that could cure any illness. As his wife became increasingly terrified, Jason swallowed the substance himself, using his own body as a test subject, promising that he wouldn't risk her safety before confirming the effects. But before he could finish his sentence, Jason collapsed in pain, convulsing. Back in the forest, the investor and soldiers had been wandering for hours without finding their prey, only to discover the corpse of one of their team members hanging in the trees. Frightened, the investor ordered a retreat, but the path they had come from had mysteriously disappeared, and strange things began happening in the forest. It became clear that Swamp Thing was the real hunter, and the soldiers were merely weak prey. Vines began to move, surrounding the group from all sides. The soldiers quickly drew their machetes to fight back, but the vines kept coming in endless waves. Meanwhile, Jason stabilized and began to mutate, awakening his ability to control plants. Excited by his new powers, he prepared to have his wife experience the same transformation. At that moment, Abby arrived to investigate and visit Jason. Sensing something was wrong when she entered, she quickly called the hospital, but Jason stopped her, and the phone fell to the ground. Elsewhere, Lucilia sat by her son's hospital bed, waiting for him to wake up. Feeling immense guilt over everything that had happened, Avery suddenly appeared, causing her to nervously pull out her gun. But during their conversation, she realized Avery had no ill intentions and genuinely wanted to reconcile. He mentioned that he was planning to divorce his wife and wanted to take responsibility as a father, hoping they could live together as a happy family. Lucilia's expression turned cold, and she told him she could never forgive him. He had turned their son into a murderer and almost killed him. She warned him to stay away from Matt, or she would shoot him. Meanwhile, Jason continued cooking Swamp Thing's organs. Abby, horrified by this, condemned his cruelty. But in Jason's eyes, Swamp Thing wasn't truly human, and even though he carried Alec's consciousness, he was nothing more than a giant plant from the swamp. As Jason prepared to feed the organs to his wife, Abby rushed forward to stop him, but Jason quickly overpowered her. Luckily, the police arrived, having tracked her phone's location, and subdued Jason with a taser. Under the shock of high-voltage electricity, Jason collapsed, unable to move. Back in the forest, the soldiers were exhausted from battling the relentless vines. It seemed the vines were preparing for a more brutal attack. The commander ordered everyone to open fire, and they unleashed a barrage of bullets, but the vines swiftly retaliated, killing the commander in an instant. While the soldiers reloaded, Swamp Thing emerged from the shadows and began slaughtering them. Faced with the unstoppable creature, the remaining soldiers fled in terror. Abby, with the help of the police, escaped the danger. Carolyn was taken to the hospital for treatment, and Liz arrived to check on the situation. Jason was arrested and taken to the station to await trial. Matt regained consciousness and learned that Avery was still alive, bringing him great relief. Matt no longer wanted to carry the burden of murder and was glad his father had survived, preferring that he not die by his own hand. This made Lucilia feel even more guilty, and she apologized sincerely, promising that once he fully recovered, they would move to another city for a fresh start. Seeing that her son was stable, she left the hospital. As she stepped outside, a thick fog rolled in, giving Lucilia a sense of foreboding. As she was about to drive home to rest, she realized Avery was hiding in the back seat. Before she could react, she was stabbed through the chest with a long knife. Avery ruthlessly silenced her, sinking both the car and her body into the swamp. But Avery's body soon began to undergo a strange transformation. He started coughing up plants, seemingly infected by the previous outbreak. Meanwhile, the terrified investor fled through the forest but was quickly caught by Swamp Thing. He fell to his knees, begging for his life. The investor offered his vast wealth, saying he could fulfill any wish. Swamp Thing delivered a harsh warning, telling the investor to return to the city and spread the word about what had happened. He was never to return to the swamp, or the vines would tear him apart. The investor fled in a panic, forever haunted by the trauma of the encounter. Swamp Thing let out a roar of rage, then slowly regained his composure. At that moment, Alec appeared as a hallucination, as if still present in his consciousness. Swamp Thing thought about leaving the swamp to live in isolation away from humans, but Alec, sensing Swamp Thing's concern for Abby, urged him not to cut ties with humanity. Swamp Thing feared that without those connections, he would become a monster in everyone's eyes. In the end, Swamp Thing decided to stay and protect the swamp, determined to stop the dark forces from spreading and to become a hero for the human world. Sometime later, Abby returned to the swamp's lab. Though she knew Alec could never be revived, she still cared for Swamp Thing. She wanted to stay by his side and explore the deeper mysteries of nature. As the dark forces grew stronger, they prepared for the battles to come. Later, Matt returned to the station, only to find the place in ruins. No officers were left guarding the area, and strange plants had overrun the station. Even the sturdy prison cells had been broken apart by vines, and Matt discovered the bodies of his colleagues on the ground. Alarmed, he grabbed his gun and prepared himself. Jason, having consumed the organ samples, had undergone a terrifying mutation. Not only had he gained the power of nature, but his body had transformed to resemble Swamp Thing's. Matt, frozen in shock, was brutally killed by Jason, and so, the story of Swamp Thing came to an end.